Give it up, give it up, give it up. So good, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys doing good? You have a good day yesterday? Awesome, good stuff. We're going to do Galatians chapter 1. We're going to do a few verses out of Galatians. And like I said yesterday, I'm just trying to day by day figure out what we're doing and listening and having conversations and seeing. And I think there's some stuff out of Galatians 1 that would be really good and important for us. So Galatians chapter 1, that's where we're going to be. How many of us know that, that hope is down and anxiety is up, right? That tends to be what our situation is, and there's a whole bunch of sociological, technological reasons for that, isolation, all those things. But a lot of us are finding hope is down, people are stressed, anxiety is high, and I think part of that reason is because of, I think deep down we're all looking for affirmation from people. We're looking for affirmation from people online. We get FOMO when we look and see our friends out doing stuff that we're not doing. Our kids don't kind of have the brain capacity to be able to deal with all the social media stuff that they see. There's constant affirmation that we want and need from people, and it creates stress and anxiety in us that kind of rises. And so what I find is a lot of people try to come up with solutions for how to answer all of that, and I think this text does something interesting in trying to answer some of those issues with us. Because what is our job in the midst of a culture that is confused like ours is? As believers, what is the job that we have to point out a world, to look at what is the role that we have in a world that is confused and isolated as ours? It is to move to states that play Christian music in Starbucks. That's the solution to our problems. No, he didn't like that. He's like, well, I just moved to Tennessee, darn it. So, is that the solution to our problems? Jesus says, no, I want you to be salt and light in a world that is broken, in a world that needs Jesus. And so Paul gives this great, which means it's going to be risky. Our life is going to be risky. It's going to be difficult. We're going to have to include people and hang with people who don't think like us and vote like us and talk like us and dress like us and act like us. We got to bring people into our lives that are broken. I remember when I first started going to church, of course, I wasn't the mature Christian specimen that you see up here today. I was a chain-smoking, baggy, pant-wearing, I had size 40 pants, and they were big baggy, and I had a chain that was connected to my wallet because I didn't want to, lose my $5. And I had a skateboard, and I was a chain smoker, and I remember a guy, our pastor preached a sermon that Sunday that you are not to be unequally yoked, right? You're not to be dating people who aren't Christians if you're a believer. And a guy walked up to my wife, who would go on to be my wife. She wasn't my wife at the time. We were dating. And he said, you have to break up with Mark. He's not a Christian. And she's like, well, what do you mean? I don't understand what you're saying. Why isn't he a Christian? He said, I saw him smoking behind the church before a church service, which I did do often because I thought I was hiding. I was behind the church, but there was this big reflective double pane kind of glass, and I didn't realize that was the senior pastor's office, and all the worship team was in there, right? Before the service, I'm like, yeah, what's going on, guys? I was checking my teeth or whatever. So I guess the guy was in there before me, and he's like, I saw him smoking. And Aaron's response was, well, what was he smoking? And he's like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, cigarettes. She's like, well, better than what he used to smoke, right? Because that was me growing up, man. I was just sitting in a garage one Friday night, smoking weed with my buddies, changing all of the problems of the universe. And then 3 weeks later, I met Jesus, and I'm back in the same garage telling them all about Jesus, right? And I mean, I'm still a little high because we got the door closed and things are, whatever, but I'm still telling them about Jesus. And it's like my life had changed in such a way. And so she was like, what was he smoking? Smoking cigarettes. Because here's the thing, never look at a person where they're at. Look at where they're coming from. And you got a lot of broken people in your churches who people judge from the outside. And they say, I can't believe they dress like that. What, she's got clothes on? Praise God. You would have seen her a month ago. I can't believe he talks like that. He said, see, this is when you start to understand Paul's big theme of grace. You begin to understand that we're all so broken and we come to this thing needing the grace of Jesus in our life so much that that's the way that we're going to actually reach the world rather than running away from it. And Paul, in this passage, gives us the solution, I think, to much of our anxiety or much of our desire for the affirmation of the world and the stress that comes through that. So listen to Galatians chapter 1, and that's going to start at verse 10. For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? That's the question of your life. That every day when you wake up, do you seek the approval of man or of God? That's it. Every decision you make, it's got to constantly be put through the filter. Am I trying to seek the approval of the world or what God is asking me to do? So am I seeking approval? Am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. That big theme again. For I would have you know that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. So here's what the Apostle Paul's doing. He's saying, in the NIV says, it's not of human origin. I love that because the point he's trying to make is it's not the gospel that we hold on to that we think is going to change the world. We didn't make it up. Because if we made it up, we would mess it up. If the power came through us, it was something that we developed, we would completely hack it because, as I talked about yesterday, we are a disaster. Every single one of us is broken and selfish and all about us. And my life is just one chaotic mistake after the next. That's just the reality. Even yesterday, I walked down to my truck this morning to get something, and I realized last night, they'd said, oh, you park over here, and it was dark, and I'll park my truck. So this morning I walked down, and I look, and my truck is in the handicap parking spot at the camp. It's a big handicap spot. I'm like, I didn't even see that. And then I'm like, okay, maybe no one will notice. And then Jack Hamilton, one of the heroes of the faith in my life, just walks by at that moment. He goes, wow, you're handicapped, eh? I'm like, what? No. What a loser. So I got like this pastoring job that I do now. Tell I'm excited about it. But when I was 29 years old and God called me to plant that church in Vancouver, and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was like, okay, I guess I'll just start this church. And about 6 months before I started that church, I did this interesting thing. I told a woman that her husband was dead, and I had the wrong guy. You've never done this? Totally true story, 1,000% true story. I had gone to visit this guy on a Friday, and he was kind of declining. This guy named David, he was sick. And I go in, and hey, David, hey, what's going on, Pastor? And then over the weekend, I didn't go visit him. And then on Monday, I drove into the hospital and pulled up, went in the same room, and didn't really check in or anything, just walked in the room, and I see like this guy, and it's him, and he's looking out the window, not looking good. And I'm like, oh man. And just as I go to walk to the table, the bed, the nurse grabs me by, she turns me around. She's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh, I'm just, here for a pastoral visit. And she said, sorry, he passed away this morning. Now, if you're taking notes on pastoral visits, when someone says he passed away this morning, say, who? So I didn't do that. And I just went, oh, must be Dave. He's dead. So I said, should I call the wife? Oh, don't worry, the doctor's on the phone with her right now. And I see the doctor, I'm really sorry. So I just leave. And I go back to my office and I look to the secretary. I'm like, hey, what's going on? Dave passed away this morning. Anything else going on? Oh, really? That's really too bad. So I went back to my office and I'm hanging out in my office. And a couple hours later, the secretary comes in. She's like, hey, Dave's wife is here. And she's like holding a bag of Subway and she's going to bring lunch to Dave. I don't think she knows he's dead. And I'm like, what? Well, just send her back, I'll tell her. So she walks into my office, it's 1,000% true, and I looked at her and I said, hey, how you doing? And she's like, good, I'm just visiting Dave. I said, Dave's dead. He passed away this morning. At which point, she passes out. And I catch her. And I put her on the couch, and I'm like, hey, look. So we start to chat, and we mourn the death of David for an hour. Some of you are like, you can't even look at me right now. You're like, what is happening? We mourn the death of David for an hour. And then I leave, I go to get some water for her, and I come back in, and I'm like, hey, here you go. And as I do that, I overhear one of the secretaries say, da-da-da-da, blah-da-da, and then she mentions another hospital. I'm like, so Dave was in hospital A, right? No, they moved him on Saturday. What? What do you mean? And I said, okay, I need you to call that hospital, and I need to see what's going on with Dave. And so they called the hospital, and they said, yeah, Dave's sitting up, waiting for his lunch. You know? I was like, shoot. So I had to walk back in the room, say, hey, what's up? Remember that thing we were talking about? So she's like, you know, and I'm like, hey, listen, she said, no, I'm dealing with it. I'm dealing with and this woman had gone through all 7 stages of grief. She was fine. She was like, I'm good. I'm going to see David in the resurrection again. I'm like, actually, you're going to see him earlier than that because he's alive. And, So here's why I tell you that story. So that you feel good about yourself. That's why. I'm serious. That why would I ever be up here if I make mistakes like that? Why would God ever use me to do anything? It doesn't make any sense. 6 months later, I planted Village and with these 30 people. And Satan used that in my life because what he said to me was, you should not plant this church because all you're going to do is hurt people because you have no idea what you're doing. And I needed people to come around me and say, oh, did you think you were going to be successful because of your performance, Mark? Or the performance of Jesus for you? You don't even understand what you're doing here. If you think that you're not allowed to make mistakes in life and God still use you, you've missed it. And this is what the Apostle Paul is trying to get at. Am I trying to please people right now? Or am I trying to please God? Because I'm trying to please people, I'm never going to function out of the mistakes that I make. I'm never going to be able to pull myself out of the complete fumbles or sins. But if it's because of his grace, see, this is a problem. We often misdiagnose the problem and the solution in our life because Paul's going to give us the solution to our addiction to pleasing people. And it's not what we think it is. We think it's all of these different things and we misdiagnose the problem. We constantly misdiagnose problems and solutions in our life. I remember I came to a point when Aaron and I had been married for a while where I just kind of created this rule that I didn't, when I'm preaching and she's in the room, I don't want to be able to see her. Like she needs to be somewhere in the dark of the room. Because, so this woman, when she sits, my wife I'm talking about, when she watches me preach, she does this. And it's not encouraging for a preacher, it's not encouraging when the person who knows you best is constantly doing it. And she does not have Tourette's. She just does that. She's like... So I got sick of looking at that because I get confused. I was preaching at a camp one time, and I was talking to someone, and I didn't know what the worship set had happened before I walked in. So I walk in like last minute, and then I get up and I start talking about kind of a philosophy of different worship, and I'm kind of critiquing, but she starts to go, and I'm like, uh-oh, did they just sing some of this stuff? I don't know what's happening. So now the rest of the time, I'm just like, no, I didn't really mean that point. And I totally rewound. At the end, I'm like, She's like, no, I don't even know what you're talking about. It was fine. It was a great sermon. I'm like, really? A great sermon? Freaking Zach. Anyway, so she is in the dark. I'm not allowed, she cannot. So I started to feel bad about that. At some point, I started to wonder if something was wrong with my marriage. And then I met James Houston. I don't know if you know who James Houston is. He started Regent College, got J.I. Packer and Eugene Peterson and all these guys to come over to make Regent College, where I went to school in Vancouver, just like a world-class school. And he, when I met him probably 4 or 5 years ago, he was 96 years old. And he told me this story, and he said, I was a consult for a church. And I went into the church to do a consult to make sure it was legit. And I came in and I was evaluating all the issues and problems. And I asked the church, where does the wife sit in the sermon? And I'm just like, oh boy, I'm gonna be in trouble now. It was fascinating. And he just said, so I went into the church and I watched the wife, and she sat in the front row and praised the Lord and took notes during the sermon and affirmed her husband. And I'm like, wow, this is a dream lady right here. I'm like, what are you? And then James Houston said, and right there I knew there was a problem. Because she was faking it. And I could tell. And I went, oh, I've actually got a good marriage. This is we're in a good situation here. And this is what happens to us constantly. We misdiagnose what the issue is in our life. We don't understand. So Paul goes, you think that what's going to solve your issues is getting affirmation from people. You think what's going to solve your issues is if you're a good person, you perform well, and you succeed. But he says this, for I would have you know that, this is verse 11, what does he say? The gospel. Do you want to know what the solution to all of your insecurity is? All of your approval of man? The gospel. It's not about your life. It's about the life and death and resurrection of Jesus, specifically Jesus, for you. And some of us don't kind of dig down to the gospel. We believe in God generically, maybe, but we haven't believed like the God. And there's a lot of churches like that. Like you could sing a bunch of worship songs that we sing in life. You could sing them in a Buddhist temple because they're vaguely spiritual, but not specifically Christian. Meaning they're about God, but what does that mean? You believe in God. You're a champ. I grew up believing in God. It was the Bette Midler version of the deistic God. The from a distance, the world looks around. That God. I believed in that God. The beard and the Zeus, it means nothing. Paul isn't happy that you believe in God. He's saying it's about the gospel. Like specifically the life, death, resurrection of Jesus Christ on your behalf. Not generically spiritual, specifically gospel. Like that you have to believe in Jesus. He took on the wrath of God for you. Your whole life, even in your, Tim Keller says, in your Bible reading, there's two ways you can read the Bible. You can either read the Bible as if it's about you, or you can read the Bible as if it's about him. And if you read it like it's about you, it will crush you every time. Because when you're reading like when you do your devos in the morning, and you're sitting there with your Bible open, and you got your coffee, and you're already taking your Instagram photo, hashtag devos, hashtag Jesus. And when you're done that, and you're reading Jesus in the Gospel of Mark, and he's walking around, and he's hanging out with prostitutes, and tax collectors and sinners, here is your temptation. That when you read those stories, who are you in those stories, in those Devo times? You're always who? Let's be honest, Jesus. And right there, it will crush you. I'm Jesus, I'm gonna hang out with all the prostitutes in my town. No. You're the prostitute. For those of you taking notes, write that down. You cheat on Jesus every day, and he doesn't crush you. The fact that any of us are alive right now. You know that song that we were singing, that he's slow to anger? Do you understand the sins you committed yesterday? He would be completely just to, what are we all doing here right now? The only reason any of us are sitting here right now is because God chose not to kill you last night. And he would be completely just. But he gave you one more day. That's what you don't get to be Jesus in the stories. You cheat on Jesus every day, and he loves you anyway. You're those tax collectors, those creeps. I know those creeps at work, greedy creeps. I know my friends are so greedy they hoard all their money, but if I go and minister to them, you're the greedy one who hoards a little bit because you're not sure what next year is going to do in Wall Street. So keep a little extra. You're the people that Jesus Christ needs to heal. And if you read, when we do these Sunday school stories and we go, hey, little Tommy, look at David and Goliath. The giant. And then David, he's a good guy. And he goes and he picks up the stones and he throws them out. And you got giants in your life, don't you, Tommy? You got giants of fear and anxiety. And if you could just be a good person and go down and slay the giants of fear. No. That's not you. When you're reading the David and Goliath story, you're not David. Jesus is David, who went down into the valley and slayed the giant of Satan, sin, and death. You are the Israelites hanging up in the forest, freaking out, hoping that a representative goes down into the valley and slays and gets a victory and then imputes it to you even though you did nothing. That's how you read the Bible, right? When you're reading the Noah story that we talked about last week, or yesterday, little Tommy's got his giraffe. That story goes, and we say, Tommy, if you can be good like Noah, maybe God won't drown you one day. And you wonder why Tommy wakes up and leaves Christianity in college. But that's not the way you read that story. You know in that story, you know when God puts that rainbow in the sky, you know in the Hebrew, it's a war bow. And it means that God has been shooting arrows down in judgment and wrath on humankind for their corruption. But at the end of the story, he hangs the war bow up and says, I'm not gonna do that again until what? Until I'm gonna create the ultimate judgment. And where's that war bow pointed? Right into the heart of heaven. Because one day, he's gonna take the arrow on himself for you. That's the way you read that story. So if we're reading it as if it's about us, and Paul goes, no, guys, this is about the gospel, the life, death, resurrection, not of you, not of being a good person, but of Jesus as your substitute. It's the only thing with power to save you. So I was in Bible college and I wanted to become a scholar. And I had a couple friends in school and I'd written this paper. And my buddy came to me one day and he said, hey man, I'm having trouble with this paper. It was at Tyndale. Where's the Tyndale guy? Is he here? Okay, yeah. What's your name again? Ben? Yeah. Ben. So Ben is a New Testament professor at the school at the school I went to, the college I went to in Toronto. So, and he knows the same professor as me. What's his name? Steve Thompson. And Steve Thompson played a mentor in my life and in Ben's life. And so my buddy, I was in Steve's classes and my buddy comes to me, he's like, I'm really struggling with this paper. Can you just lend me your paper? And I'm gonna kind of read it, get some inspiration, and then I gotta write this paper because it's due in a couple days. I said, sure. So I lent him the paper, and I said, but you can't copy it. No, I'm never gonna copy it. Okay, great. So he hands the paper in, and a couple weeks later, he comes to me, he's like, hey, listen, I feel really convicted. I'm like, why? He's like, I copied it word for word. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? He's like, I copied it word for word. I got in a tough spot. I'm like, okay, well, I want to become a scholar and a professor one day. So maybe you just, keep that to yourself and let's get through college without getting expelled. And he's like, yeah, but the Holy Spirit convicted me. I'm like, no, he didn't. No. He's like, yeah, I gotta go confess this. I said, what are you doing? No, you're gonna mess my life up. He's like, I gotta do it. So he goes to this teacher and he confesses. And he says, listen, I cheated. And they said, okay, we're gonna hold a tribunal on Friday. And so my buddy comes to me, he's like, listen, they're gonna hold a tribunal. I'm like, of course you're gonna hold a tribunal. And he's like, but here's the thing, I'll never tell them it was you, ever. They could kill me, they can torture me, I'll never give them your name. I said, bro, you better not, man, this is my life we're talking about. He's like, all right, I'll never tell. So he goes into the room, and we talked about before, he's like, I don't even think they're gonna wanna know who gave it to me. The point is that I cheated. So he goes in, and they 5 people up on this thing, and he sits in this chair, and they open up the books, and they're like, who gave you the paper? It's all they wanted. He's like, oh, I'm not gonna tell you. The point is I cheated. We don't care about you. Who gave you the paper? We want who gave you the paper. And he said, I'll never tell. His name. Okay, so we know it's a guy. 50% of the class, gone. Who gave you the paper? Okay, hold on. They said, how long do you think it's gonna take us to figure out who you hang out with? We know someone gave you the paper, and for 20 minutes they go, this guy, finally, he says it took this long. Through tears, torture, pain. He says, Mark Clark, books closed, everyone stands up, leaves the room. I'm done. So he comes to me, he's like, they tortured me. I gave him your name, I'm really sorry. I'm like, you are an idiot, and my whole career is over. So I wait for the expulsion phone call, and I start coming up with different careers. And day 1 comes, no phone call. Day 2 comes, no phone call. Day 3, day 4. A week goes by, I go to classes, I play it cool. Hey, guidance counselor, hey. A month goes by and I don't hear anything. And then I find out that Steve Thompson went to the council, had heard about this, sat them all down person by person and said, I don't want you going after Mark because you're dealing with this issue religiously and with no grace and no gospel. And if you touch him, I'm going to create all kinds of problems for you. And I never heard from the council because of Steve Thompson. This guy went to bat for me. He put himself in my place for me, substituted, went to bat, won the victory. And I did how much? Nothing. Actually, as one scholar has said, I just thought of this. He says, this is a fascinating quote. He says, the only thing you bring to the equation of salvation is the sin that necessitated it. If I could lose my salvation, I would. This is why it's not based on me. And this is why Paul's going, this is what changes everything when you actually understand the gospel, not religion, the gospel itself. And so then he says in verse 11, for I would have you know that the gospel that was preached by me is not man's gospel. I love this because he says preached. And when I started my church in Vancouver, like I told you yesterday, everyone said you don't preach, just talk in pear-shaped tones and have conversations with everybody. And have conversation, great. And Paul goes, you preach. There's a thing that happens where, so I was invited by this group a few years ago. I won't name them. They were doing a big conference in Toronto, and they said, we want you to come and be one of the keynote speakers. And I had this kind of text in my brain about pleasing God or people. And they said, we want you to talk about this, for an hour and da-da-da-da. So I show up to the conference, and day one, it's just like 500 or 600 pastors in a room, and I just watch the first speaker get up, and he is just, everyone's asleep. And he's up there going, the contextual reality of post-exilic Israel. Right, he's just going on and on and on. And I'm watching from the balcony, all these pastors just asleep. So then the second speaker gets up, and he does the same thing. And the third speaker gets up, same thing. And I'm on day 2. So I basically go home and I'm like, I got to change my whole talk. I'm not doing that. So I plan something else. And I get up and I deliver what I felt God was telling me to say. And afterward, they all bring me in this room and they're like, yeah, we didn't ask you to speak on any of that. And I'm like, yeah, I know. Because what I said was, when I pulled in here, I drove past a bus stop and there was a whole bunch of people waiting for a bus. And while we're in here parsing Hebrew verbs, they're out there dying and going to hell. And I didn't realize one of them had just written a book on Hebrew verbs that was sitting in the front row. So they said, we don't want you to come back to this conference. And actually, when you went on the website, you couldn't, my talk was up there, but you couldn't click on it. I was blackmailed. Blackballed from the thing. It was like all these others, like, listen to this. Mark Clark, blah, 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 can't get it. They said, we don't want you to come back. And I could have gone away from that and wondered if I did the right thing. But the lineup of people told me a different story. Because when I stepped off that stage, person after person after person crying, talking about what this moment did and what this moment did. And there was a guy, he's sitting there, he's like, dude, I'm a pastor. He's like, I didn't know this event was happening. I was walking by this church, and I saw some signage, and I heard you yelling in the room. And I came in the room, and he's like, I had resigned, had a resignation letter on my computer from my church. I wrote it a week ago. He's like, I'm out of ministry. I'm sick of ministry, right? This happens to pastors at times. It happened to me during COVID, right? Any pastors in here want to quit during COVID, right? Like every one of us, because everyone's a moron, right? right? I would support doctors, and people, why you support the doctors? I'm like, okay, I support the police. Can't support the police. Well, I'm a policeman. I'm a doctor. I support the doctors. I don't support the doctors. You got the vaccine? Oh my goodness. I got to be careful of my uterus. You didn't get the vaccine. Do you hate old people? What is wrong with everybody? So everybody had their dumb ideas during COVID. And so pastors want to quit all the time because of this stuff. He goes, I offered a resignation. I was going to go do something else in my life, become a plumber or whatever. Because at least you can laugh when you're given the check. You're a plumber. So he goes, I offer my resignation. And I walked in here, and he goes, this isn't even my name. He's like, I pulled the name tag off a hook. And I walked in here, and he's like crying. And he's like, this 25 minutes, it was like it was you and me in a room, and God went, boom. And he goes, I'm going to delete that resignation. I'm staying in ministry because I realize there's a niche that I have to offer the world that nobody else does. And then, so these people are going, and then these people are saying, and I'm going, am I here to please man or God? This is what the text is raising. And the way that you're ultimately going to have that kind of contentment and understand your role in the world is because it's based on the gospel, not on what you're doing. So this is what, because I looked out at all these people in the church and these pastors, and I knew what they were going through. They're not going through all this stuff that these scholars think they're going through. They're going through stuff like I was going through at the time. 2 weeks before that event, I had done a membership class with 50 people in the room. People wanted to become members of my church. And the next day, one of the ladies that was in that class went and killed her daughter and put her in the trunk of her car. That's real life. That's what the real world actually offers that we are supposed to preach into. This is what he's saying. You're supposed to preach into people's lives in a way that offers transformation, not information, because the world is a mess. And by the way, it needs us to do so like now. Not like in a month, like the urgency. One of the big values we had as a church, from a values perspective as our staff, was urgency. We'd go, look, we don't have time to sit around. Like, I didn't grow up in the church. I don't, half the conversations Christians have, I have no idea what anyone is talking about. We love these, what about this and all the nuances of every little thing, and every non-believer that no one's talked to in 15 years doesn't care about any of this stuff, but we've got it figured out. And we come into the church and we think this is important stuff. And there's a sense of urgency. And I always said to our church, we're more of like a Corinthian Acts 17 vibe than an Acts 19 vibe, right? Like Acts 19, Paul is in Ephesus for like 3 years, and when he leaves, all the people are crying, and they're like, you're with us, you're our pastor. Acts 17, it's just Paul like yelling at statues. I'm like, that's us. We just yell at statues, we yell at people, we tell them they're idols, and we gotta, and he stays with them in Corinth, this crazy jacked up church where they're all doing wacky stuff. He stays with them for a little bit, and then he moves on. And I'm like, that's what our church is. It's gritty, it's raw, it's like really quick, like, hey, listen, when'd you stop sleeping with your stepmom? Like 3 months ago. Okay, elder, I gotta go, all right? And that was Paul in Corinth. We gotta go. We don't have time to sit around and nuance every little thing. There's a rawness and an urgency to your life that needs to happen. Instead of sitting around and just complaining about where the world has gone, do something about it. And what do you do about it? You preach. You proclaim into people. I don't mean preach like from a pulpit, or I'm talking about you speak into people's lives the reality of what does he say? The gospel, not religion. Don't assume people are going to be able to figure the gospel out just because you serve them either. Cut their grass. They're never going to figure out the atonement of Christ just by that alone. You need to actually articulate what it's about, which is going to be really hard. Some of you in this room just need to hear these words, and I just want to encourage you. I was talking a little bit ago, there's a guys group that meets at Bayside in this backyard. Eddie, right? Eddie was talking to me about it, and it's because he's part of it, and it's like 150 guys in a backyard every 3 or 4 months, about probably 20 minutes from where I live, all Bayside guys or people who work in jobs, and it's really just raw, like it's just dudes sitting in a backyard, chatting, and it's like 100, and we don't record those talks. Can't record those talks. You don't want those to end up on the internet. And I looked at them when I talked a few months ago, and I said 3 words: you are needed. And some of you in this room don't believe that. You don't believe you're needed. But you're like I remember there was this movie a long time ago with Ted Danson, and someone said, "Why are you workaholic?" And he said, "Well, because I thought a man was supposed to provide for his family, so I worked really hard." And then he stops and he goes, "No, you know what? That's not why I'm a workaholic. It's because whenever I come home, I feel useless." Which is almost, at times, every guy at some point in their life. Like when I got 3 daughters. Pray for me. I feel lost half the time. Anyone going to T Swift on Saturday, by the way? Yeah, what's up? I'm going to T Swift, all right? And they're all dressing up as different T Swift albums, and I don't know what I'm like Reputation, I think. I'm like, what's up? So I got 3 daughters, so I live in a girl world. I got a dog that's a female. And yesterday, while I'm up here, of course, my youngest, who's home alone with Aaron, because my other 2 calls me. She's got a picture of a new girl dog that she wants to buy, and of course, she's gonna get it because I'm up here not to stop the insanity. So I'm gonna go back to 2 girl dogs, guaranteed. I live in a female world. But at the office, I'm the boss. I'm the man. I say something at the office, it gets done. Hey, I think we should, the team goes, and they go off and do it. How would you like it done, sir? It's brilliant. And then I come home. And I pull up that driveway and I can feel all my power dissipating. And I walk in the front door and it's, "You forgot the garbage again, you idiot." It's Wednesday. Do you know how many times my wife has said these words? "You know I don't work for you, right?" And I'm like, "I know, it'd just be so much easier if you did." Hold you accountable. And every time that happens in someone's life, we feel unneeded. And the Apostle Paul just said, part of your job is to preach the gospel, to save the world, and you are more needed than you could imagine. You are more needed than you can imagine. And it's going to be a challenging, difficult thing. The Apostle Paul lived a life where he got beaten and shipwrecked. The church is a gritty place. When I first became a Christian, I would like sit outside my school and smoke my pack of cigarettes, read the Bible. I'd be like, man, if I ever go to a church, those are gonna be some jacked up people. Because everybody I'm reading is here getting torn apart by lions, getting their heads cut off. The church is gonna be raw and real and gritty. And when I finally showed up, it was the safest group of people I've ever met in my life. Just safe for the whole family. "Come on in, you wanna come to the potluck?" I'm like, what is this, man? I thought I was gonna come in and just go like, "Sit down!" Flares and whips. "Sit down, shut up!" The death of Christ, we're gonna sing about the death, and the slides would go up, and there'd be blood splattered, and wood, and nails, and gritty. And it was birds flying over mountains, sucking pollen out of flowers. I was like, what is this place? Safe people with a safe message. And Paul's like, man, are you willing to give up all the safety because you really believe in the urgency of the gospel? All the comfort, all the ease, all the things. Am I trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? You know, when I left Vancouver to come to work at Bayside, every single person was against me. The staff, the people, the church, friends, they're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? You shouldn't do this. You're going to move down to California? Are you crazy? And this text had to pop into my brain. Am I trying to please God or people? Because if I was trying to listen to people all the time, can I just end this way? The God we serve, because some of you just need to hear this because you don't believe it. The God we serve is still alive and well and calling you to play a part in this. And he's going to do stuff through your life. If you'll be risky enough, if you'll be the gritty enough, like some of you are bored with Christianity and it's because you're living a kind of Christianity that is boring. If you're bored with Christianity, when you get back home, go to a Starbucks, sit in the Starbucks and say, God, tell me something about someone in this room, and then I'll walk up to them and I'll say it, and then see how bored you are. You're bored because you're living some domesticated, boring version of this thing. But this God is so alive and so willing to do crazy things. I'll end this way. About 3 weeks after I told that woman that her husband was dead, I was sitting in my office working on something, and the senior pastor of our church walked into my office and he said, Mark, I was just praying and God told me that you have to go visit this woman. And I'm like, that doesn't sound like a good idea at all. So I'll do it in a week or two. And he said, no. He told me you got to go do it today. So I went to the secretary and I got her address and I show up to this woman's house, which is not what I normally do. And I knock on the door and there's no answer. But I look and I see that her car is there, so I know she's home, so I just keep knocking. And I stand there for 10 minutes. Finally, this, 67-year-old lady opens the door. And she looks at me and she goes, what do you want? And she's wearing pajamas. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm like, well, I just came to apologize to you about what happened. I'm really sorry, obviously. I fumbled that. Understatement. And she said, well, do you want to come in? I said, sure. So I went in and I sat down with her and we sat and chatted for like 3 hours. We became buds. We started talking theology. And as I went to leave, I'm standing at the door and she goes, do you want to know why I'm wearing pajamas at 2 o'clock in the afternoon? I said, yeah. She said, because I've been through such a tumultuous 3 weeks since you totally messed my mind up with this, that I walked down the stairs today and I walked into the kitchen and I said, God, today I'm going to take my own life. And she said, unless you send someone to the front door to encourage me. I fell asleep on the chair and woke up to the sound of you knocking on the door. And she goes, I got to take that as a sign that he still loves me and he's still for me. And if you doubt the existence of God and you're here, you're not opening your eyes. He's doing stuff you don't even know about. He's moving and bringing people and situations into your life, and your job is to open up your eyes enough to doubt your own doubts, to examine why you even have them, and begin to realize he's a good father who's hunting you down, is going to do amazing things in your life. Your response is to be obedient to it. So, Father, I pray that we actually have the courage to do so, that you would kind of get rid of the self-doubt in this room, that you would get rid of us trying to please people versus you, because the power is when we trust you to do amazing things through us, as lowly and sinful and mistake-ridden as every single one of us are. You can still use us to do unbelievable things as long as we keep the gospel of Jesus versus the gospel of ourselves central. And I pray that when we do go home at the end of this week, that you would use us to reach as many people as possible, because time is short and heaven is real. Use us no matter if we think we are worthy to be used. We are needed. In Jesus' great name we pray. Amen.